LinkedIn presents.
I'm Michael Kovnat, and this is The Next Big Idea. Today, how to stop being a victim and start becoming the person you're meant to be. Now let me ask you a question. What's holding you back in life? What's keeping you from being your awesomest self, your highest earning, most connected, most creative, most loving self? Because something's holding you back, isn't it? Maybe you were bullied as a kid or mistreated at work. Maybe you got dumped by someone and that hurt your confidence. Maybe you've been judged for the way you look or the way you talk. Maybe you've had health issues or been ripped off financially. Maybe somewhere along the way, you've suffered a mild or serious trauma. Well, I feel for you, I do, but then again, welcome to the club. Most of us at times, and to varying degrees, have felt screwed over by the world. Psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman has a name for that way of thinking, the victim mindset. And in his new book, Rise Above, he argues that that mindset itself, not the facts of your life, but your response to those facts, is what's likely holding you back. And it's not just you. Scott argues that a victim mindset has become a defining feature of modern life, on social media, in our politics, in how we talk to each other and to ourselves. Now, to be clear, Scott doesn't deny the reality of trauma. He's lived it. As a kid, he was diagnosed with a learning disability and shunted into special ed, where he felt isolated and looked down on. He was told he wasn't college material, but instead of internalizing that story, Scott rewrote it. Today, he has degrees from Carnegie Mellon, Cambridge, and Yale. He's an award-winning cognitive scientist, a professor at Columbia, and one of the most thoughtful and compassionate psychologists working today. So how did Scott break free from resentment and rumination and shift from a victim mindset to what he calls an empowerment mindset? And how can the rest of us do the same? In his book and in our conversation, Scott offers a realistic approach, one that acknowledges pain but focuses on possibility. Doesn't that sound good? Aren't you ready to let go of old wounds and become the best version of yourself?
Hi, I'm Kwame Christian, CEO of the American Negotiation Institute, and I have a quick question for you. When was the last time you had a difficult conversation? These conversations happen all the time, and that's exactly why you should listen to Negotiate Anything, the #1 negotiation podcast in the world. We produce episodes every single day to help you lead, persuade, and resolve conflicts both at work and at home. So level up your negotiation skills by making Negotiate Anything part of your daily routine.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessie Hempel, host of the Hello Monday podcast. Start your week with the Hello Monday podcast. We'll navigate career pivots. We'll learn where happiness fits in. Listen to Hello Monday with me, Jessie Hempel, on the LinkedIn Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Scott Barry Kaufman, welcome to the Next Big Idea podcast.
Oh, thanks, Michael. So great to chat with you.
Yeah, so really interested in talking about your new book. Congratulations on your book, by the way, Rise Above. Rise Above, Overcome a Victim Mindset, Empower Yourself, and Realize Your Full Potential. Sounds like sounds like a plan.
Yeah, and it's possible.
Yeah. I want to learn how to realize my full potential. But actually, the first way in for me when I read the title of your book and then started getting into it was, why now? What is it, this idea of a victim mindset? And I think we'll get into some of the ways this operates on an individual level. But what was it that you were seeing in the culture that made you think that there was something to say about this topic?
You're right. There is a lot I saw in the culture for sure. But also I've been doing research on this topic for 10 years or so on vulnerable narcissism. And it's a form of narcissism that goes under the radar. So everyone knows about grandiose narcissism. That's the chest thumping, I'm the greatest, I'm entitled to special things because I'm superior. But vulnerable narcissism is feeling entitled to special things because you feel like you've suffered. And it is really correlated very much with this victim mindset where you blame all your problems on others. You don't have productive ways of moving forward with your life with intention and purpose because you keep ruminating on your past. So I kept seeing that over and over again in my research as an inhibitor of well-being and happiness and self-actualization. And then, like the past 5-6 years, everywhere I look, I see people kind of having this mindset. And I really go into this book with a spirit of wanting to help people. I mean, it's a self-help book.
You do seem to be diagnosing at least partly something in the culture where there seems to be more prevalent. I don't know if it's because of social media and people sort of performing their trauma or their victim status. There have been books written like Jonathan Haidt and Greg Lukianoff writing about college students and, in their book, The Coddling of the American Mind, how there seems to be a mindset where being a victim and having experienced trauma becomes sort of a form of clout in the culture, a way to get attention and rewards and recognition.
Yeah.
An interesting approach that they took in that book is that they thought that some of these mindsets that were gaining traction on campus were in direct opposition to what they thought were healthy psychological principles, that you can be resilient and grow from difficult experiences is a kind of foundational idea in, the psychology of well-being, I think. And yet there seems to be something going on where people are almost nursing their wounds or sort of making their victimhood part of their identity in a way.
Why people would want to make it their identity is rather confusing to me, but there does seem to be rewards from being seen as the victim. You certainly don't want to be seen as the perpetrator, Michael.
Right.
You can't do anything right if you're the perpetrator, and you can't do anything wrong if you're the victim.
Right. I mean, I want to get into that because it does seem to be, playing the victim does give you a certain moral license in a way, right? Because you think, because I am the victim, therefore I can sort of do what I need to do what I want to do, and you can't really criticize me or judge me. So there is a certain power move with it, I think.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. But I mean, there are plenty of people who were legitimately victimized, and we want to have compassion for that, of course. Also, you can be victimized and you can have been the recipient of a terrible thing in life and not have a victim mindset. You can have experienced challenges and not have trauma. We it's almost like we don't give people permission to not be traumatized by something.
Before we get into some of the specific individual techniques you recommend, this cultural prevalence of the victim mindset, do you think some of it's sort of an overcorrection? Because maybe for a long time in the culture, there was sort of a tendency to deny the trauma of entire groups of people, to kind of, on an individual level, it wasn't culturally acceptable to talk about your childhood wounds or something. And so I think maybe some people, either because of their individual trauma or their collective trauma, are feeling the need to let's voice this, let's not suppress it anymore.
Yeah, I talk about it in the intro, society has made a lot of what I would call progress, in calling things out. And I do think we overcorrected. I think the term trauma is one of the most searched for words. When people are trying to grapple with the why behind everything, people end up on trauma being the answer to everything. But I think there's a broader thing here with there being a victim mindset that people are too naturally falling into. And I think it's losing a sense of agency, a sense of empowerment. I think an empowerment mindset is much better than a victim mindset. To me, to blame everything on trauma is a part of a victim mindset. You're saying every single problem I have in my life is a result of, and then let's find something external to blame, whether it's my mom when I was 5, whether it's this, that, or so. I think that we really need to change our collective consciousness, so people take responsibility for how they're showing up in the world and what they're doing, and the agency, the deep reservoirs of resiliency that we have within us that we don't even realize we have within us. You'll never know what you can handle unless you take that responsibility.
I'm actually not that active on social media and certainly not on TikTok, but I understand from your book and from other sources that talking about trauma, blaming things on trauma is very popular in some corners of social media.
Yeah, in trying to find my voice for this book, I felt like there were two extremes that I didn't really identify with, that didn't really resonate with. On one end was this approach of like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and to me it ignored context, ignores systems. It's a little too callous and cold. And then on the other side is the coddling approach, which I see all over social media. There are so many trauma influencers, it makes me want to vomit. And they're all like, it's okay to be an asshole. It's okay to stay in bed all day and do nothing with your life. You have trauma. I see you. I care about you. Now buy my book. And I just don't like that approach because it's not very empowering. I want to empower you to get your butt out of bed and get into the stream of life, to feel fully alive, to find meaning, to find purpose, to realize that you're more than just what has happened to you in your past. You're a whole person with many dimensions to you, including many parts of you that aren't broken. Yeah. But if you just sit and ruminate and stew on the parts of you that are broken all day, and I don't think that's very helpful. So I try to find my own voice in this book, and I didn't like either extremes. And so I called it honest love, my approach. Not tough love. I don't even like the tough love approach either. The tough love people are just as annoying as all the others. But honest love is validating someone's real felt experience of pain and suffering and letting them know that you think they got this. That letting them know that you think they can change, they can transform. It's playing yes and with life, like an improv sort of way. I'm a big fan of improv.
I know the book doesn't get into politics, but I did, as I was reading it, really think, well, I actually see this culturally in the political realm too. It almost feels like there is a politics of victimhood or resentment that's very alive. On the one hand, President Trump has sort of made retribution part of his political mission. The whole tariff strategy is based on this idea that we're getting ripped off, we've been ripped off. And on the left too, people often feel that Democrats have been victims of dirty tricks, traditionally leftists have often associated with people that you might call victimized sexual or racial minorities, migrants. So there can be a tendency on the left too to highlight victimhood and to kind of, embrace it. It seems like things have gone pretty far in that direction in our politics.
Things keep seesawing back and forth between left victimhood and right victimhood. I was chatting with Sam Harris yesterday, and I was like, Sam, I'm going to say something that's going to trigger you, but I miss wokeness because to me, wokeness being allowed, even though I can't stand it, is the sign of a healthy democracy because you get free speech. If far left victimhood is the price we pay for a democracy, let's allow it. But now right. It's swung so much in the opposite direction where there's like the slightest hint of wokeness, the right is like, we're victims of these college students that are protesting, send them back to their home country. That's a bit of an extreme reaction to speech that you don't like. Yeah. And so I want to live in a world where I have ideas I disagree with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you'd like to think we could just have a sort of a fair contest of ideas in the political sphere, just everyone putting forward their best arguments and fighting it out in that way. But instead, there is this sense that the other side is just beyond the pale. They're evil. They've done such awful things to us that we're entitled to do awful things to them. And I just wonder if there's a path out of that culturally and politically.
Well, I think there is a path out of it. It's called Rise Above.
All right.
There's strategies, techniques. I mean, a lot of it, I think, is, psychology, trying to apply the psychology of what I know about emotional regulation, about clear thinking, about not finding the need to blame everything on your past, but
Mhm.
view and look for a better future. And also all the things I have in part 2 of my book, which are ways of finding the good within you. Everyone's so focused on pointing the finger outward that it's really sad, because people could be leading with their own character strengths, their own virtues, their own values, their own sense of calling for a positive contribution to society, but instead, so much of their own brain bandwidth is being consumed by pointing the finger. And that's just not how you grow, learn, and develop. I could spend all day easily scrolling through Instagram at all the people who are more successful than me, scrolling through, looking at all the people with more likes than me, more Instagram followers, blah, 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 and just spend all day, cursing the gods. Or I could spend all of that time trying to be a better person, trying to take active steps, which they took, to get a better audience, to live life on my own terms and in my own way. And that would be a far better use of my time.
Mm.
But instead, I keep choosing to doom scroll. No, I'm joking. I don't.
Well, even if you don't, a lot of people do. And it makes me wonder, do you have theories on why people do this, why they embrace the victim mindset? You would almost think it would be more natural to revel in your strengths rather than nurse your wounds and kind of fall into this victim mindset. I wonder why human beings do it then.
Well, I think that's learned helplessness is the default state. Something very primal. It's the path of least resistance. You have to actively learn hope. You have to actively think through strategies and conscious goals and things to move beyond. It is the easiest thing to just stay in bed and cry all day. If you're a kid and you're feeling a little sick, you wake up, Mommy, I need to stay home today. I can't go to school. I don't feel that well. It's like complaining and getting attention and getting rewarded for that attention is very seductive. It's a very primal thing and way of getting attention, primal way of getting resources. And in a lot of cases, you want those resources. In the cases of real victimhood, real horrible things happen to you, it makes a lot of sense to want to get help. And that's a good thing. But when it becomes a pervasive mindset, which is what is the focus of my book, which is a perpetual victim mindset, you're limiting your life. You are really limiting. You're living a life of avoidance, not a life of engagement in the real world and in the full range of things that life can bring you, only if that's on the other side of pain and suffering. In fact, a lot of pain and suffering can bring post-traumatic growth, but a lot of people don't see it that way.
You got into that idea of post-traumatic growth in your book, which I found interesting.
Sure.
So it's, and if I'm not mistaken, that's the idea, not just of healing from your trauma so that you're getting back to where you were before, but that you're actually growing and getting better than before from the way you process that trauma. Is that right?
Yeah. Irving Yalom says sooner or later you have to give up all hope for a better past. And I think it's true and profound. Coming to a sense of life acceptance, and given what has happened to you, how can you move forward with grace, equanimity, purpose, and self-connection? How can you do that is a very practical and wise question. And a lot of people don't realize those things are available to them.
To take one more minute on the kind of group level of the victim mentality, you cite some research in your book about Israel and Palestine and some studies that were done. And maybe you could tell me about that, because this idea of kind of locking into a collective victimhood story and how that can prevent communication and progress and peace. I think in this research, it was like, when Israeli Jews were primed to focus on the Holocaust, then they were much less willing to engage than if they had not been primed that way. And similarly, Palestinians, when they talked about the Nakba and, the their great national tragedies, they were not in a peacemaking mode. Those are historical realities and can't be denied, but they can be exaggerated or played down, and might be the only way you can create some sort of dialogue.
There has to be an acknowledgement of suffering on the other side for there to be any impasse whatsoever, which I understand is a huge stretch for both sides. They won't even take an inch to say that they might be the cause of the suffering on the other side. But research shows that even just acknowledging suffering, even if you don't acknowledge that you're part of the suffering, just acknowledging, wow, maybe there's multiple victims here at once.
Yeah.
It goes a long way in lowering the temperature. It's like no one's interested in lowering the temperature.
Right.
And I am. Well, I am.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like this is my life purpose. I mean, I'm on Columbia's campus. I want to, as much as possible, bring peace amongst warring factions at Columbia. I mean, I'm really committed to making this a go in the next year. Let's do it. Let's go.
Hey you! I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Fields. Tune into my podcast for conversations about the sweet spot between work, meaning, and joy. And also listen to other people's questions about how to get the most out of that thing we call work. Check out Sparked wherever you enjoy podcasts.
You know, as a child, I know you were diagnosed with a learning disability, and you tell that story, and I think it's interesting because you could have stayed locked in that identity, you know, and there might have been some benefits to staying locked in that identity. You would get a lot of compassion. You would get a lot of support and resources.
I hate that shit. You know, when I broke out of special ed in 9th grade. I had enough of that crap of being coddled all the time, and you know, oh, you can take untimed tests, and don't worry. There's something within me that does not want to be coddled. Like I want to. I mean, I've had a very overprotective mother. You know, I still do, and I don't, want to be told that I can't do things. You know, I want to do things. And so I took myself out of special ed and signed up for the hardest classes I could and jumped in the deep end, applied to really good colleges, and I had to find out creative solutions and ways of getting into the colleges because it's a whole story. I wrote a book called Ungifted, but I did not want to be a victim. Look, there are a lot of people who go through terrible things that don't want to be a victim of what they've been through. They don't want a victim mindset over it. I have a friend named Tom Nash who's Australian. He is a quadruple amputee. You know, he rolled up to my party, my book release party in style with two, hooks, fist bumping people. He's like, I'm not a victim of, this is who I am, and I'm fine with who I am, and I'm fine with what happened, That's a hard pill for other people to swallow, by the way. Like, they can't accept that. How can you be okay with a hook for a hand, Like, everyone's so judgy. Yeah. Everyone's imparting on others, what traumas they should have. Let people decide what traumas they want to have.
Yeah. When you were growing up, was there...
Yeah, I just went on a tangent.
No, it's okay. No, it's okay. But it's interesting because I'm interested in Tom Nash's story too, and I wonder the same thing for him. I wonder if this is a gradual thing or all at once. Was there one moment where you just decided, you know what, I'm done with this. I'm gonna own who I am and move forward and not stay locked in this victim mentality?
There was a specific moment where a special ed teacher who was covering for the regular teacher took me aside after class, and she said, "What are you still doing here?" And I just was like, yeah, what am I still doing here? Like, that's exactly how I feel.
So just
And
that one question sort of
just one
unlocked
question
it
can
for
be
you,
really
yeah.
empowering. We really underestimate the extent to which, like, even as a coach, like I created a form of coaching called self-actualization coaching, and we're currently training coaches in a 6-month internship program and training program. And don't underestimate the power of one powerful coaching question. And this teacher asked me one question that just completely changed my life and empowered me to just take myself out and see what I was capable of.
It is interesting the way you mentioned this in the book too, that it's kind of easy to see these patterns in other people. You know, how other people might be playing the victim or nursing their trauma wounds. It can be harder to see it in yourself sometimes. And, you know, even me reading the book, I'm like, oh yeah, these awful people with a victim mindset, that's not me. But, you know, if I'm being honest, like there are events in my past, whether they were romantic rejections or career setbacks or health, you know, there were things that still are kind of active in my psyche. They're kind of these old wounds that I kind of still do sort of nurse. And I feel like, yeah, those bad things, they're a big part of my story. And I probably don't admit it to myself, but I am probably a little more stuck on those past wounds than is healthy for me. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's okay. I think that we really we do need to meet people where they're at and also allow for 2 steps forward, 1 step back. What you just admitted, Michael, when I hear something like that, I see a person with great self-awareness, great self-honesty, and a real genuine interest in growing and learning. That's what I see when I hear something like that. I get my antennas up when I talk to people who are like, you know, they put on a robe and they'll be like, I'm enlightened and everyone should take my courses and follow me. You know, like I teach classes and I try to be as authentic and honest as possible about my struggles. I'm far from perfect as well as any human. And I think we need to be honest about that.
Yeah.
Am I doing too much real talk here, Michael, for
No.
the next big idea?
Dude, we like real talk here.
Is this okay?
Yeah, no, we can go deeper if you want. We can keep going. One of the topics that you bring up in the book, and I actually almost wanted you to write more about because I'm fascinated by the topic, is forgiveness. And it's certainly in a story where your victimhood is caused by someone else. So you've been victimized by a person or a group of people. It seems to me that forgiveness is this kind of master key for getting you out of that box. I think it has a reputation as being sort of a soft, I forgive you. It's like but to me, it's like a real power move. It's like a way of like letting that person's hold on you go, you know, like you did something awful to me. I'm going to forgive you. And that's going to empower me.
Correct. You know, sometimes we carry 2 burdens. We carry the burden of the thing that happened to us. Then we carry the burden of the rumination and the thoughts that distract us from living the life we truly want to live. I feel such a strong purpose, calling, you know, with the work I do, with being a professor teaching the science of living well. I'm so excited to teach this course in the fall, the science of living well at Columbia, and teach students mindsets for success in life and a way of being. Everyone's so obsessed with doing, and I find doing so overrated. I think that your way of being in this world and creating a synergy where what's good for you is good for the world. That's the kind of synergy that Abraham Maslow talked about, is the kind of transcendence that we should be aiming for, not a vertical form of transcendence, which is like I am above others. That's not the kind of transcendence I think is best for living well.
Yeah. I mean, that's why this idea of forgiveness, I think, is so interesting to me, because sometimes we have this zero-sum mentality. Like, well, if I forgive you, I'm letting you off the hook. I'm giving you a gift that you don't deserve. But really, you're giving yourself a gift, you know, by forgiving someone. You're taking back your own agency and authority. And it doesn't have to be at their expense either. It is kind of it's a gift to both parties, really. And I wish it were easier for people. I think for a lot of us, forgiving is very hard. I don't know why, but people don't want to do it. They kind of want to like keep that resentment.
Yes, and I don't believe in cheap forgiveness. I talk about that in the last chapter. I think there kind of has to be a two-way street of some sort. You want to get some sense that someone is remorseful in some way and wants to make amends. There are many cases where you can move on with your life with peace, inner peace, and also intentionally make the decision to not forgive someone. I think that's possible too.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of nuance here. Humans are messy, but a lot of research does show that forgiveness in many cases really helps you with your own well-being. Do you understand what I'm saying about cheap forgiveness?
Yeah, I do. And I think you're pointing me to the idea that it's only superficially about interpersonal conflict, because really it's about how you're handling your internal conflicts. So that, cheap forgiveness might not really solve anything. And as you say, it could be possible to live a healthy life and choose not to forgive a perpetrator, but that's because you've made peace yourself with what's happened. One thing that's I found surprising about your book is that when you talk about a victim mindset, usually you're thinking about something external has victimized you. But the bulk of your book is about the way you can be victim to your own emotions, your own cognitive distortions, your own thought processes, and then really what you're helping people do is liberate themselves from their own dynamics that are holding them back.
It's beautifully said. It's clear you've thought a lot about this as well. And you talked to a lot of people on this podcast, and you probably hear a lot of differing perspectives on living well. But I think that the more you hear lots of different perspectives, you realize there are common threads. There's no rocket science here. Often the most profound, enjoyable moments in life are the simplest. We can move forward with our lives with purpose and in line with our values, even if we don't feel like it. We don't want to be a slave to our emotions. We don't want to be a victim to our emotions. We don't want to be a victim to our cognitive distortions. There's a certain set of principles. This is obviously why I teach a course on this. There's a science behind it. But even, Michael, if you don't even read the research literature, I think you get it. You get it.
I mean, I try to get it, and there are always little surprises along the way. I might think I know the right tools for healthy living, but then, you introduce me to ideas like learned hopefulness, as an alternative to learned helplessness. Can you say what that is and how one can achieve learned hopefulness?
Our default state is this helplessness, but we can learn the skills of cognitive reframing our emotions, goal setting, things for the future, different ways of being we want to be in the world. There's just so much this is what the whole book is about, is basically learned hopefulness. We can learn hope, but it's an active process. That's the point we want to make. And it's intentional, and you have to take responsibility for doing this.
Yeah. And just so the listeners know, the book is a very practical one in the sense that you offer a lot of tools and techniques, exercises to try to achieve this learned hopefulness. And you point out things like this idea I found interesting, the value of what questions versus why questions. Could you explain that?
Tasha Eurich talks about how why questions are not productive. They're not leading anywhere. You can, if you're have an asshole boss, and you're like, why do I have such an asshole boss? Why do I have to do more work? That's not as why am I so angry? Those questions don't lead to growth as much as what questions, like, what am I feeling right now? What can I do to insulate myself from this boss? What can I do to create boundaries, create healthy boundaries? What can I do in the moment right now with my own emotions to regulate them and get back in touch with the highest part of myself? I mean, it's a world of difference in the way we frame questions in our own head.
Yeah. Why is inherently backward looking,
Yes.
why did this happen? Which, can be worth investigating, but what questions maybe situate you more in the present? They situate you in curiosity, like, let me try to figure out what's going on and what to do about it. There's a tradition in therapy or psychoanalysis that we hear about, which is geared towards uncovering your past traumas, your past wounds, and kind of identifying them. And then there are more forward-looking techniques that are like, well, that is whatever it is, but the more important thing is, what are you going to do now? Do you find as a psychologist, as a coach, that you're often having to steer people from their past to their present and future?
I think that's like a real good benefit of coaching over therapy. Coaching is very future oriented and practical, and a lot of therapy, not all of it is showing up every week and ruminating about that one thing that happened to you and not coming up with productive things for the future. But self-actualization coaching is a whole person approach to coaching that helps you get in touch with your real felt needs, your talents, your highest potentials, your creative potential. Get really in touch with your creative potential and move in that direction.
You talk about this idea of that you don't want to be a victim of your emotions. And I wonder if we could talk about that just for a few minutes, because to me, I think commonly we think, well, our emotions are just our emotions. They're real and they need to be expressed and addressed. So in what sense could I be a victim of my emotions?
You're a victim to your emotions whenever you take them at face value and in a way become a slave to them. When you treat them as facts, not just as information or signposts. And when you become a victim to them, when you identify completely with your emotion. So if you're feeling anxiety and you're like, oh, I'm an anxious person, or I'm anxious, even just saying I'm anxious as I'm feeling anxiety. I'm feeling upset in this moment. We don't want to become a victim to our emotions. We want to have more freedom and flexibility, cognitive flexibility, to move in the direction of our values and not being held back by what could be very incomplete, inaccurate information that we're receiving from our body.
If you could offer some of the techniques that you have in your book for dealing with your emotions so that you're not a victim of them, you're not caught up in them. I know you talk about emotional granularity, you talk about mindfulness, you have a number of things. What do you think some of the keys are to creating a little distance from your emotions in a healthy way?
Well, one, you can get in touch with your beautiful monsters and do the handshake practice where you go one by one and you give a handshake to your beautiful monsters.
What are your beautiful monsters?
Yes.
What is that term?
It's a term that a very famous Buddhist monk wrote about, and parts of you that you don't like, but you invite them in. You invite them in, and you greet them, and you also set a container, where maybe you don't always let them in, but you recognize that there are parts of you that are trying to tell you things that we want to listen to and we want to acknowledge. A lot of times when we have unconditional positive regard for various parts of ourselves, those parts become less defensive. Those parts become less... this also is obviously related to Richard Schwartz's work on family systems, internal family systems theory. But also we can create a separation between us and our thoughts and decoupling, so if you say things out loud, like I'm anxious, just say it out loud. Just keep saying it in funny different ways. I'm anxious. Maybe we're off, you realize you're changing your relationship to the words, you're changing your relationship. That's what you want to do, is you want to create a separation, a distance. You want to get the stuff out of your head. And you want to also just realize the absurdity of life, the absurdity of you. People take themselves way too seriously. People take their emotions way too seriously. And that's why I love improv. I love existential humor. I love absurdity. It allows us to change our relationship to our thoughts and change our perspective.
I love that you also have this idea of refocus on service. I was reminded I had a moment of extreme stage fright once. I was getting ready to speak to a group, and I was so anxious and I was so locked up in this feeling of fear and, how am I going to be judged and what if I screw it up? And I talked to a friend just before I began speaking, and he said, well, just think about, you have something to offer these people. They're there to hear you offer something, and how can you be helpful to them? How can you be useful in this moment? And it was so helpful. I just got out of my own head, and it wasn't about me anymore. And I was still I still had butterflies, but I was just able to really be focused on what I could do, and made a lot of difference.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you're anxious and you want to stop being anxious, the way forward is not to keep ruminating on how anxious you are, but getting outside yourself. Transcendence is often the key to everything. Transcendent experiences can be helping others, but can also be getting into the flow state for an activity that you really love. Getting into the flow state with a fellow human, can also be a big one. So there's lots of ways to get outside yourself. It doesn't always have to be overt, clear ways you're helping people, but it can be ways you're getting outside of yourself where you're just not your self-focus. You're not so focused on yourself. You're focused on the activity you're engaging in. And it can lead to a peak experience. But Maslow also had a phrase a lot of people aren't familiar with called a plateau experience. With the plateau experience, you find the miraculous in the everyday. Not everything has to be this big peak experience. I've started a nonprofit. I have a humanitarian aid. A lot of that often ends up being virtue signaling bullshit anyway. Well, look, I smiled at this old lady today and made her day. I don't know. I'm trying to think of all the littlest, tiniest things you could do as your way of being love, as opposed to doing love. So many people are so focused on doing love so that they feel good about themselves, so for their ego. But just be love, unconditionally in this world as you just go about your day, and you will see a lot of benefits to well-being for yourself and others.
Just a final question, Scott. You've made a few references to your mission, your purpose, and one thing I really admire about you is how intentional you are about what it is you're trying to do in the world.
Thanks, Michael. Thank you.
And I wonder if you could just tell me briefly maybe how you came to that. Obviously, a lot of us struggle to find our purpose and get clear about it. How did you get clear about it? And what do you think it is that you're meant to do in the world?
Well, I mean, this book is a natural, fateful culmination of the thread running through everything from my childhood, which is to empower people to realize their higher potential. I'm not here to only focus on what's wrong with you. I want to help people discover the parts of themselves that are alive and creative. I do a lot of research. I've done a lot of research on creativity. I've done a lot of research on intelligence. Mindsets. The thread running through all of that is human potential.
Well, Scott, thank you very much for making time for us and sharing your personal story and
thanks, Michael.
Letting us be part of your mission to spread human potential. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. I love chatting with you.
And that's our show. Scott Barry Kaufman's new book, Rise Above, is out now. And if you want to buy a copy, there's a link in the episode notes. Also in the episode notes, a link to subscribe to my newsletter, The Book of the Day. Every weekday, I invite a leading nonfiction writer to distill their new book into 5 actionable takeaways. Today's episode was produced by Caleb Bissinger, sound design by Mike Toda. The Next Big Idea is part of the LinkedIn Podcast Network. I'm Michael Kovnat. See you next week.